Powerful people understand something most never learn. The moment you feel the need to explain yourself, you have already surrendered psychological ground. Explanation often disguises itself as clarity, honesty, or kindness, but beneath it lies a subtle bid for approval. From a behavioral psychology perspective, the human brain constantly scans for cues of status, certainty, and emotional stability. When you over-explain, you unintentionally signal uncertainty about your own position. You communicate without words that your choice requires validation from others to exist. Authority does not come from how well you justify yourself. It comes from how settled you are in your decisions. People with real power know that clarity is internal before it is external. They speak when necessary, act decisively, and allow silence to carry weight. This is not arrogance, it is self-trust. And self-trust is deeply felt by others long before it is consciously analyzed. In power dynamics, the one who explains the most is often the one who feels the most threatened. This is not a moral judgment. It is a psychological pattern. When someone questions you, challenges you, or misunderstands you, the nervous system reacts. The instinctive urge is to correct, justify, and defend. Yet powerful individuals regulate that impulse. They understand that not every misunderstanding deserves clarification, and not every challenge deserves engagement. Explanation places the other person in the position of judge, subtly granting them authority over your choices. Silence, on the other hand, keeps authority where it belongs. When you explain too much, you teach people that access to you is earned through pressure. When you don't, you teach them that your boundaries are not negotiable. Power is less about dominance and more about emotional containment. Psychologically, humans respect what feels scarce, composed, and self-directed. Over-explanation floods the interaction with excess information, emotion, and justification. It overwhelms rather than convinces. Research in social psychology shows that confidence is perceived not through verbosity, but through decisiveness and emotional steadiness. Powerful people speak less because they think more. They choose their words carefully, not to persuade, but to express alignment with their own values. They do not rush to fill silence because silence does not threaten them. In fact, silence often does the work they don't need to do. It creates space. It forces others to sit with their own assumptions, and it subtly shifts the psychological burden back to the person who is questioning. There is also an important distinction between explaining and communicating. Communication is intentional and grounded. Explanation is often reactive. When you explain, you are responding to someone else's emotional state rather than acting from your own center. Powerful people communicate from choice, not from pressure. They understand that being misunderstood is not a crisis. Misunderstanding only becomes dangerous when you tie your identity to other people's perceptions. The need to explain is often rooted in a fear of being judged, rejected, or seen as wrong. But those fears lose their grip when your sense of self is internally anchored. Authority grows when you no longer outsource your self-worth to the room you're standing in. Behavioral psychology teaches us that people test boundaries unconsciously. When someone presses you for explanations, they are often testing how solid you are, not because they are malicious, but because the brain seeks hierarchy and predictability. If you collapse into justification, you fail the test. If you remain calm, concise, and unshaken, you pass without effort. Powerful people don't argue with tests, they observe them. They recognize that emotional restraint communicates far more than verbal defense ever could. This restraint is not coldness. It is emotional intelligence in its most refined form. It is knowing that not every emotional impulse deserves expression and not every thought deserves air. One of the most misunderstood truths about power is that it does not need agreement to exist. Weak authority depends on consensus. Strong authority depends on coherence. When your actions align with your values, you don't need to convince anyone. Over-explaining is often an attempt to manufacture agreement so that you can feel safe. Powerful people generate safety internally. They don't need to be liked in order to be effective. They don't need applause to validate their direction. Their calm presence signals, I know where I stand. And that certainty is deeply regulating to others, even if it initially makes them uncomfortable. Discomfort often arises not because you are wrong, but because you are unmovable. From a psychological standpoint, explanation can also weaken your negotiating position. The more reasons you give, the more material you hand over for debate. Each explanation becomes a point of attack, reinterpretation, or manipulation. Powerful people understand strategic restraint. They know that fewer words leave less room for distortion. They answer questions directly when necessary, but they do not volunteer emotional labor to soothe others' insecurities. They allow people to disagree without rushing to repair the discomfort. This signals strength, not hostility. It shows that your stability does not depend on immediate harmony. Another reason explanation weakens authority is that it often emerges from emotional leakage. When you feel compelled to explain, your tone shifts, your body language changes, your voice speeds up or softens. The nervous system betrays you. Others pick up on this subconsciously. They may not know why, but they sense vulnerability. Powerful people train themselves to pause before responding. That pause is everything. It interrupts emotional reactivity and restores choice. In that pause, they decide whether a response serves their values or merely soothes their anxiety. Most explanations never survive that pause because they are revealed as unnecessary. It is important to understand that refusing to explain does not mean refusing accountability. Powerful people take responsibility for their actions without theatrics. They say what needs to be said and stop there. They don't narrate their internal struggles or justify their decisions with personal history. They separate explanation from integrity. Integrity is consistent behavior over time. Explanation is often a performance meant to manage perception. One builds trust quietly, the other seeks it loudly. People who embody quiet authority know that trust is earned through patterns, not speeches. As you begin to grasp why explanation weakens authority, you may notice resistance within yourself. That resistance is natural. It comes from years of conditioning that taught you to be agreeable, accommodating, and emotionally available at all times. But power requires unlearning. It requires the courage to disappoint, to be misunderstood, and to remain grounded anyway. The goal is not to become silent out of fear, but silent out of strength. When you stop explaining, you reclaim energy. You stop performing, you begin standing. And from that place, something shifts, not just in how others see you, but in how you experience yourself. When you no longer explain yourself reflexively, you begin to confront something deeper, the absence of internal validation. Most people explain because they are still negotiating with themselves. They are unsure whether their decision is solid, whether their boundary is justified, whether their instinct is acceptable. Explanation becomes a way to think out loud and seek reassurance at the same time. Powerful people have already done that work internally. They validate themselves before the world ever has a chance to weigh in. This internal validation is not arrogance or denial. It is psychological maturity. It means you have examined your motives, aligned them with your values, and accepted the consequences. Once that process is complete, there is nothing left to explain. Your nervous system is calm because it is not waiting for permission. Emotional discipline is the backbone of this kind of power. Without it, silence feels unbearable. The urge to explain is often the urge to relieve emotional tension. When someone questions you, doubts you, or disapproves of you, the body reacts with discomfort. The heart rate changes, the chest tightens, and the mind scrambles for words that might restore balance. Powerful people do not confuse emotional discomfort with danger. They allow the sensation to exist without acting on it. This is a skill, and like all skills, it is trained. Emotional discipline means you can feel pressure without leaking information. You can experience misunderstanding without chasing correction. You can sit in someone else's disappointment without absorbing it as your responsibility. Behavioral psychology shows that humans are deeply influenced by emotional contagion. The calmer person in an interaction almost always sets the tone. When you rush to explain, you amplify emotional energy. When you remain steady, you neutralize it. Powerful people understand that their internal state is more influential than their arguments. They regulate themselves first, knowing that regulation creates authority. This is why calm confidence often wins over loud certainty. It is also why people instinctively defer to those who appear unbothered by chaos. Emotional discipline turns you into an anchor, and anchors are respected even when they are silent. Internal validation also requires you to release the need to be seen as good, kind, or reasonable at all times. Over-explaining is often tied to identity protection. You want others to know that you meant well, that you are fair, that you are not careless or cruel. Powerful people accept that their intentions do not need to be constantly broadcast. They let their character speak over time. They are willing to be temporarily misunderstood in order to remain internally aligned. This is difficult because the ego craves immediate resolution. But power is patient. It understands that clarity earned slowly is stronger than approval gained quickly. One of the most liberating shifts occurs when you stop trying to manage other people's emotions. Explanation is frequently an attempt to calm, reassure, or soften someone else's reaction. Yet this creates an unhealthy dynamic where you become responsible for feelings that are not yours. Powerful people respect emotional boundaries. They allow others to have their reactions without rushing in to fix them. This does not mean indifference, it means respect. It says, I trust you to manage your response, just as I manage mine. This mutual responsibility is the foundation of adult-to-adult interaction. Without it, power collapses into caretaking. As internal validation strengthens, you begin to notice how much energy was previously spent on self-defense. You were not defending your actions so much as your identity. You wanted to be understood because understanding felt like safety, but real safety comes from self-acceptance. When you accept that not everyone will agree with you, like you, or approve of you, the compulsion to explain dissolves. You no longer need to convince the room that you belong. You bring your belonging with you. This internal shift is subtle, but others feel it immediately. Your posture changes, your voice steadies, your words become fewer and more deliberate. Emotional discipline also sharpens your discernment. You begin to recognize when a question is genuine and when it is an invitation to justify yourself endlessly. Powerful people answer genuine questions with clarity and brevity. They do not confuse curiosity with entitlement. Not everyone who asks deserves access to your reasoning. Not every challenge is made in good faith. Learning to distinguish between the two protects your energy and preserves your authority. This discernment is not cynical, it is wise. It allows you to engage meaningfully without becoming entangled. Another critical aspect of internal validation is the willingness to stand alone. Explanation often functions as a bridge back to the group. When you explain, you are saying, please understand me so I can remain connected. Powerful people are comfortable with temporary disconnection. They understand that leadership, strength, and self-respect sometimes require solitude. This does not mean isolation from others. It means independence from approval. When you can stand by your decision, even if no one else applauds it, you become unshakable. That steadiness is magnetic. People may not agree with you, but they will sense your solidity. Psychologically, the mind seeks closure. Explanation provides quick closure, even if it is shallow. Silence delays closure, forcing deeper processing. When you stop explaining, you give others space to reflect rather than react. This often leads to more respect, not less. People take you more seriously when you do not rush to defend yourself. They assume there is something solid beneath your calm. And often, there is. Silence paired with consistency becomes a powerful signal. This person knows who they are, and they are not here to negotiate their worth. Developing emotional discipline also means tolerating unfairness. Sometimes you will be judged incorrectly. Sometimes narratives will form without your input. The impulse to correct every false assumption is strong, but it is also exhausting. Powerful people choose their battles carefully. They understand that time reveals truth more effectively than argument. They allow their behavior to speak where words would only inflame. This requires trust in the long game. It requires patience and a deep belief that you do not need to control every perception to maintain your integrity. As you move further into this mindset, you may notice that your relationships change. Some people will become uncomfortable with your reduced explanations. They were accustomed to your accessibility, your emotional labor, your willingness to clarify endlessly. When that changes, they may push harder. This is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is a sign that the dynamic is recalibrating. Powerful people do not retreat during this phase. They remain consistent, calm, and respectful. Over time, the pressure fades, and a new equilibrium forms, one built on mutual respect rather than emotional extraction. Internal validation and emotional discipline are not about becoming distant or cold. They are about becoming centered. When you are centered, you respond rather than react. You choose silence rather than justify. You trust your internal compass more than external noise. And from that place, authority becomes natural rather than forced. You no longer need to announce your strength. It is felt. You no longer need to explain your decisions. They stand on their own. And as this becomes embodied, not performed, you step into a quieter, deeper form of confidence, one that does not need words to be recognized. At a certain point, this internal work begins to show externally, not through effort, but through presence. Presence is the quiet signal of power that cannot be faked. It is felt before it is understood. When you stop explaining yourself, you give your presence room to emerge. You enter spaces without the need to announce who you are or justify why you belong. Your body language slows. Your movements become deliberate. You listen more than you speak, not because you are unsure, but because you are observant. Powerful people read rooms before they influence them. They understand that awareness is a form of control, and awareness grows in silence, not in explanation. Silent confidence is not passive. It is active restraint. It is the decision to let others reveal themselves while you remain grounded. In power dynamics, the person who speaks the least often learns the most. When you stop filling gaps with explanations, others fill them with their assumptions, insecurities, and intentions. This information is invaluable. Powerful people do not rush to correct narratives because narratives expose more about the storyteller than the subject. By staying quiet, you gather data. You see who respects boundaries and who resents them. You see who is curious and who is threatened. This awareness sharpens your judgment and strengthens your positioning. Boundaries are the natural extension of silent confidence. When you no longer explain, your boundaries become simpler and stronger. You say no without a story. You disengage without drama. You change direction without apology. This can feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you were conditioned to equate explanation with kindness. But boundaries without explanation are not cruel. They are clean. They prevent resentment. They prevent manipulation. They teach others how to treat you without forcing you to educate them emotionally. Powerful people understand that boundaries are not requests. They are statements, and statements do not require justification. From a psychological standpoint, boundaries backed by calm presence are far more effective than boundaries backed by emotion. When you explain a boundary, you invite negotiation. When you state it and remain steady, you close the loop. This steadiness communicates that the boundary is not a reaction, but a principle. Principles are hard to argue with because they are not situational. Powerful people live by principles rather than moods. They do not need to convince others to agree with those principles. They simply live them consistently. Over time, consistency builds credibility, and credibility commands respect without demand. Presence also changes how conflict unfolds around you. When you are no longer defensive, conflict loses its fuel. Many confrontations escalate because one person is trying to prove something. When you remove that need, the energy shifts. You respond instead of reacting. You choose silence where words would escalate. You ask one calm question instead of delivering a speech. This often disarms aggression because aggression feeds on engagement. Powerful people know that not all battles are won by fighting. Many are won by refusing to participate in the emotional chaos at all. There is a quiet authority in knowing you do not need the last word. The last word is often an ego craving, not a strategic necessity. When you stop chasing it, you gain something far more valuable: composure. Composure under pressure is one of the clearest signals of strength the human brain recognizes. People trust those who are not easily shaken. They follow those who remain steady when others unravel. And they respect those who do not need to dominate a conversation to feel secure. Silent confidence tells the world, I am not threatened by your opinion of me. As this becomes embodied, you begin to command respect without effort, not because you demand it, but because you are no longer seeking it. Respect flows toward those who are self-contained. When you are emotionally self-sufficient, you stop pulling energy from others and start generating it. Your presence feels grounding rather than draining. People feel calmer around you, even if they cannot explain why. That calm is power. It creates influence without manipulation and leadership without noise. It is the kind of authority that does not need to announce itself to be recognized. Another important shift occurs in how you handle praise and criticism. When you are internally validated, neither has the power to destabilize you. You accept praise without inflation and criticism without collapse. You listen, you evaluate, and you decide what is useful. You do not rush to defend against every critique because your identity is not under threat. You do not over-explain your intentions because you know intentions do not outweigh impact. Powerful people are pragmatic. They adjust behavior when necessary and ignore noise when it is irrelevant. This discernment preserves energy and sharpens focus. Embodied confidence also changes how you relate to time. Explanation is urgent. Presence is patient. When you no longer feel pressured to explain yourself, you stop reacting to artificial deadlines created by other people's discomfort. You take time to respond. You allow silence to stretch. You do not hurry to make others comfortable at the expense of your own alignment. This patience signals that you are not operating from scarcity. Scarcity rushes, abundance waits, and psychologically, people defer to those who appear to have time because time is associated with control. As you live this way, you may notice that some people drift away. They were attached to the version of you that over-explained, over-gave, and over-accommodated. When that version disappears, the relationship no longer functions the same way. This is not loss. It is refinement. Powerful people accept that growth changes their social landscape. They do not chase old dynamics out of guilt. They allow space for new, healthier connections to form. Connections based on mutual respect rather than emotional dependence. This is part of embodying authority, letting go without needing to explain why. There is also a deep sense of freedom that comes with this embodiment. Freedom from rehearsing conversations in your head. Freedom from justifying your choices to imaginary critics. Freedom from managing impressions constantly. When you stop explaining, your mind quiets. You become more present in your own life. You act from intention rather than reaction. This inner stillness becomes visible. People sense when someone is not internally at war with themselves. That peace is compelling. It draws respect without effort and curiosity without invitation. Ultimately, powerful people never explain because they have nothing to prove. They have proven themselves to themselves. Their decisions are rooted in self-knowledge, their boundaries in self-respect, and their silence in emotional intelligence. They understand that power is not loud, frantic, or defensive. It is calm, selective, and grounded. It does not rush to be understood because it trusts that clarity will emerge over time. It does not chase validation because it already possesses it internally. When you embody this way of being, you stop trying to control how you are perceived and start controlling how you show up. You become intentional rather than reactive. You speak when your words add value and remain silent when they do not. You allow others to project, question, and assume while you remain anchored in who you are. This is not withdrawal from the world. It is mastery within it. And from this place, your presence alone becomes the explanation, one that requires no words, no defense, and no permission to exist.